Vitaly, friends, I am Vitaly Portnikov. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, talking about sanctions from Ukraine. Decided to continue doing business from the Russian Federation. So are the sanctions. And Trump shits about a bill that may have been drafted by the Republicans, and after all, it's obvious that the American Congress has the hooters. Maybe Ukraine, Yaka is continuing to do business from the Russian Federation. Donald Trump ends with Iran and finds himself in front of a serious sanctions grip of both the United States and the Western ones. It is obvious that Iran, the powers of the global pub, is pleased, economically having drunk from the Russian Federation with such a rank in order to continue the Russian-Ukrainian guilt. There is already a threat of sanctions about Rosneft and Lukoil. I will accept a low body on the automotive testing of such Ukrainians as India, Turkey, and the People's Republic of China have bought new Russian naphtha, which can still create serious problems for the naphtha industry of the Russian Federation, and will put sumny into the revenues of the Russian budget. And I will also become obvious, you can still have sanctions everywhere, and our business, tied up from the Russian Federation. Then Ukraine's global beer bins are unique and sanctions and high tariffs from the received states will not curtail their trade from the Russian Federation, and such a rank will put the evil power to choose the continuation of the war and survival. But once I had a chance to explain, even with the truth, the sanctions against the Russian Federation would be very effective. Such sanctions. And this means the same values and powers of the so-called global. There was also a notification that the collapse of international law and the flight of innocent people produce a shortening of the trade from the evil power and the alignment of minds for an economical abroad. The Russian Federation began with Putin and has long been lost in the war from Ukraine and lived out of the minds and civilized retinue, right up to the change of its Chekist regime. And an aggressive power will enter an economical protectorate. On the screen, the product lines are on the yaks and again on the feet, and before Russia pretends to be both a protectorate and a demand. Both you and the reports are aggressive ambitions of the Russian political community and the Russian people. And in order for the Russians to agree that the mind of a civilized retinue is correct, do not tell them about what the Hromadians of the Russian Federation think of as good and evil. Nicola will not wait with a biblical interpretation of the evil power, as I have already shown, before the choice of mischief and survival, and for those before the choice of mischief. The willingness to serve evil and anti-human policies, and the willingness to live by the rules of a civilized world. So in those situations, sanctions against those Ukraine and continue business from Russia are absolutely the right and rational way out of guilt. Buckets of straight Russian political curve to conceive about Hacha on fire on the Russian-Ukrainian front. However, for the understanding of the President of the Russian Federation, the Russian political, the Russian Viskov, of the fact that they will not conquer Ukraine in time and will not turn to die as a Chekist, and the model and foundation of the Russian state and the sphere will float at the cordon of the Radian Union 1995. To what we will respect, there will be a further stage of Taisku on Putin, but sanctions will be imposed on Avtov. And it is important to stitch sanctions into the icon of Ukraine and the global pub. And with the year, sanctions will also be imposed against the workshops themselves, in order for them to send Turgovly from the Russian Federation. To are not the simplest schliacks for the protection of the Russian budget, Russian social stability, the position of the Russian ruler, and aggressive guilt. And theoretically, the minds of the President of the Russian Federation are already covered with tired hands. I am extremely grateful for, and will decide on my admission to the Russian Federation and readiness to NATO, and to the auto defense sector of Russia, including for this Ukrainian pre-lethal strikes on naphtha and auto defense facilities of the terrorist federation. Girlfriend, I'm still important to stitch behind the sanctions and put on the auto enterprise of Ukraine, a global pub, will threaten their closure and will continue on the cars of the Russian Federation. Indeed, there will be sanctions against yaks for continuing business from the Russian Federation without serious shutdowns. Tilki for the period are needed in order that from Russian products to products I say at a time to the automotive industry in Bulgaria. Taki with NATO probny cleaning plants. On the 4th, it seems that it cannot notify greedy compromises with the Russian political kornistvo. And the real position of May, and the position with a direct view to dismantling the Russian political regime, and demonstrating the failure of the regime to praise, and the government is not a solution to international law. And in a civilized light, then the rule of the protectorate high cooks Trump's legs, I replace them with Bush's legs. Well, and in view of the fact, the assets of the Russian Federation are also frozen in the West today. But the pennies on the Ukrainian infrastructure are visible, and it is necessary to help Ukraine. Even more whoppers of the Russian Federation, I am a participant in the aggressive guilt of my radiated power. Nikola will not rest against Ukraine. And completed guilt, and with the dismantling of the evil Chekist regime, of the chauvinistic and Tilka ideas. All these warehouses can be allowed to talk about the fact that we will hear and we will be able to read about the completion of the Russian-Ukrainian guilt. And what seems are extremely important both for us and for us is facing a threat in scaling up the blame and conflict from Russia for the prospect of a nuclear dump, and the powers of the beacons are ready for this. Diakuyu. Inflate on the topic of the channel, subscribe to it, subscribe to my social channels in Patreon, Coffee, and Donatello. And it helps to develop these resources sponsorship function.